Hi, what the HealthTech listeners. I'm your host this week, Hayley Kiddier, Marketing Executive at Radar Healthcare. This week, I'm going to be joined by Rebecca Linley, Senior Communications Executive at Radar Healthcare. In this podcast, we're going to be tackling social media, what this means within health and social care, also some trending ideas and best practice around this subject. So, welcome, Rebecca, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about social media and the impact that this can have on the sector?
Yeah, definitely. So there's so much positive that social media can bring to health and social care organisations. So to put this into context, there's nearly 5 billion people worldwide using social media at the moment, which is 62% of the population. So obviously by being on social media, you're so much more accessible to your audience. People can find you a lot more easily. Obviously, social media at the minute is being used heavily as a search engine. I know I do this regularly when I'm even looking for holidays or anything like that. I will go on social media and look at people's reviews on social media because I think you connect from a person to a person. It's almost like you trust that review a little bit more because you can see that person talking about that hotel or so on and so forth. So obviously, social media is a great marketing tool that can help you connect with your audiences, whether that be through posting, engagement, instant messaging, all those kind of things. We recently attended the Care Show London, and one of the sessions there was basically talking about social media and how it can be like the shop window to your organisation. And I think that is so true because it gives you a perfect opportunity to highlight all the positive and good things that you're doing in your organisation. Within health and social care, as we know, there is a lot of negativity within the media and stuff like that. So having this opportunity as an outlet to showcase all the positive things that you're doing within your organisation to your audience, not only is good for your brand, but helps reassure the people that have trusted within your service. So, for example, loved ones, residents could be in your organisation. So although your target audience might not necessarily be on these platforms, people connected to them will be, and they will be following along to see the things that you're getting up to and that kind of stuff. And then more on that, obviously social media is such a good opportunity to be able to network with the right kind of people, like-minded people. We do it all the time through LinkedIn. We'll connect with different people. So for example, a lot of our guests are found through social media. So one of our recent guests, a patient safety expert and nurse, Linda, was on recently talking about empowering nurses. She has a really huge following on LinkedIn, Instagram and X, and that's essentially how we found her. She posts so many influential videos, educational videos to spread awareness. There's so many influential people like Linda on there that are sharing educational videos. And that's another resource that you can use social media for. Something that we do, especially at Radar Healthcare within our marketing team, is we dedicate time to scroll through content, looking at our partners, looking at just what's happening within the industry. It's a great tool to help you stay on top of what's going on because obviously so many people are on there, so many people are posting about trending topics and topical things that are happening within the industry. So yeah, it's a really good resource to get information and be reactive to that information.
I think that's really important as well. It can also work as like an added support network.
Yeah.
Everyone needs a support network, and by bringing that sometimes on social media, you can in essence find a group of like-minded individuals to help you with situations that are arising or questions that you've got or resources that other people have used, and I think that's another way.
Yeah, 1,000%. I think, for example, someone could post something that's really positive within the industry and then someone else could be influenced by that, and it almost starts that rolling effect of just creating one giant community. And I said this in the last episode that I was in, that basically we are stronger together, and you'll find that on social media there's obviously a lot of negativity around social media, but there's a huge community of people driving positivity and being collaborative and wanting to promote things that other people are doing and being really supportive of one another. So yeah, I would definitely recommend any health and social care organisation to be on social media. There's heaps of benefits. I mean, there's a lot of risks and negatives, but we'll get onto those in a bit, I think.
Well, let's explore those now. Becca, what are the risks and what are the, causes for concern and, maybe sometimes the barriers to entry as to why organisations go and utilise social media?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, obviously, the big one is if you post something on social media, it is out there, potentially forever. You need to be really aware of your digital footprint. Obviously, there are things like privacy settings that you can apply. However, there's no real tracking to whether or not those posts are being shared after you've deleted it or that kind of thing. So yeah, I would definitely recommend being super aware of what you're posting and being aware of what your employees are posting too, because if they are connected to your organisation, so for example on LinkedIn, you do typically connect where you work, so that will be reflective of what they're posting. So I think there is a bit of an awareness piece there, training that needs to happen for any employees using LinkedIn or social media that will be potentially sharing your posts and then obviously representative of your organisation. One other thing that you need to be super aware of is you are subject to the same laws as publishing. So obviously there is a liability there. You need to be aware of safeguarding too. So for example, especially within health and social care, you can potentially become blind to your environment a little bit when you're in it every day. So for example, there could be people in the background of a picture that do not want to be on social media. So you need to be cautious of what you're posting and who's in the background. Or there could be some sort of poster on the wall that's got residents' names on it. So yeah, there's those kind of things that you need to be a little bit cautious of. And then obviously being on social media means that you are open to negative criticism or potentially offensive comments on posts and things. So there's a few ways that you can make sure you stay on top of that. Obviously being active on social media and seeing what people are posting. If someone does leave a bad review, I think first and foremost, don't be super reactive, because sometimes it can be difficult to take a step back and not take things personally and have a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. But if you just have a bit of a policy in place and a conversation potentially with a senior leader of what the processes are when this kind of thing happens, then you can be prepared. So for example, best practice would be to typically reply and potentially acknowledge how this person's feeling. Obviously there's different circumstances. You can potentially remove posts, hide comments if it is something that is just offensive. But if it is a negative experience that they've had with your service, then you could potentially look at replying, acknowledging how they're feeling and asking to take this offline. I think a key thing is that people will look at those comments and will look for a response from you. So that is one thing to keep in mind, definitely.
Yeah, and I think it's also about having that two-way conversation. If you're encouraging, comments, etc. on the posts that you're posting, then you've got to also expect that not everything is going to be 100% positive. So having a plan in place to tackle any negative comments or anything that is not ideal, then is certainly a good plan to have.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a learning opportunity. Obviously, any feedback, any reviews are a learning opportunity, whether or not it is positive or negative. And I think it's how you react to those comments and feedback that people will really appreciate. And if you're seen to acknowledging someone who's unhappy with your service and you're doing something about it, and then you can evidence that you have put something in place to say this wouldn't happen again, or these are the steps you're putting in place to help improve that area, then I think people will really appreciate that. And then on the flip side, obviously there's a security issue. Whoever's using social media for your organisation really needs to be aware of how to keep up to date with all the compliance checks and things. Make sure that you're not clicking on any dangerous links, those kind of things, and keeping your passwords really strong and not sharing them with other people, because obviously otherwise you are at risk of getting hacked. And then I think, obviously, especially within health and social care, a big thing is time. I'm going to assume that most organisations won't have a dedicated person for social media, so this will be a job that people do on top of other responsibilities that they have. So I think that is a big consideration to have. Do you have enough time to dedicate yourself to this job? Because it is a big job, especially to make it successful. And that there are a lot of other options. For example, there's a lot of agencies out there that can support you. You could potentially look at splitting the workload between multiple people within your team. That's something we do at Radar Healthcare, and it works really nicely to help workload management. So yeah, I think obviously there are a lot of risks, but there are also a lot of benefits, and I think the benefits definitely outweigh the risks and negatives around social media. Especially, you just need to be aware of them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's definitely something interesting what you said there about the use of agencies, the use of outsourcing departments. I know obviously all of that will come with budgets and things like that, but it's also, you can get it to a point where you can just grow your audience organically, keep posting, take a couple of channels at a time. There is less risk sometimes if you just do that yourself. You know what you want to post, you know the message of your brand, and you know what you want to portray. So just give it a try sometimes. I think.
Yeah, and I think exactly what you've just said there. Don't overstretch yourself. I think best practice would literally be take one channel which you think, which your audiences are on and using, and really, really become an expert within that platform and establish a brand, establish a following, and then move on to the next. And yeah, I think that's the best way.
We see that Radar Healthcare role as well. We have a much larger following on like LinkedIn in comparison to something like Facebook, but within the social care sector it might be the flip reverse. So it's just looking at the channel that you can have the most impact from.
Yeah, definitely.
What would you say are kind of like the best practice within each social channel from like your experience?
Yeah, so I think generally, first and foremost, the first thing that you need to think about is setting clear and achievable objectives. There's no point doing something for the sake of it, so don't just post without having some sort of target or goal. Set yourself KPIs and then measure those to make sure to understand the success of each post and see what resonates better with your audiences. So I think that's the first and foremost thing. Then it's obviously also really important, like you said earlier, about establishing what your message is. Your message needs to be consistent across all your marketing channels. So not just social media, whatever you're posting on your website needs to trickle down into your social media activity. It's super important. This kind of comes with the messaging anyway, to just be yourself, be authentic. If people are following your brand, they probably like you or they're using your service, so they'll know what your values are.
I also think, just adding from what you said there as well, it's also about looking at the analytics of when you are posting and seeing what happens. Sometimes there's such a clear distinction of what posts perform really well and what posts kind of don't. So I think it's like tailoring your content and constantly keep evolving to meet the needs of what your audience wants to see, and that all can be found through the dashboards, etc., on the back of social media.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing is, depending on your organisation and your audience, that will depend on when's the best time to post, what kind of content resonates the most, and what content receives the most engagement and things like that. And I'll come on to this in a little bit around like all the great stuff that you can do with the platform's individual analytics as well as tools that you can use too. But just to follow on about best practices, market research is so essential too. I know that we at Radar Healthcare use social media, as I've already touched on, as an educational tool. So as you know, we kind of split it out weekly, and each person has about an hour or so on social media each day. And we spend that time not only engaging with our partners and other industry professionals, but also just doing a bit of market research, looking at our competitors, looking at what's out there, what's trending, and then sharing those best practices within the team. I think social media is such a good upskilling tool. And that's something really important that sometimes gets a little bit overlooked, I think. I think another thing that people should really consider doing is speaking to their stakeholders, speaking to their internal teams, going to their employees, digital natives within their team, asking them what should I be posting on social media? What would you want to see on our social media account? But then also going into, say, for example, a care home, speaking to their residents, what do you want to see on our what would make you follow our social media account? Those kind of questions. And then obviously, as we've already touched on, look at where your target audience is and then really hone in on that platform and really maximize engagement, posts, and all things like that. For example, we use LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, X, and YouTube, but different platforms have different purposes, obviously, and sometimes might have different audiences. So what, like you said, what might suit one organisation might be completely different for another. I know TikTok's really popular at the minute with all businesses because it's video, it's quick, and it gives you a real good insight into the personality of your brand. I know, for example, X has lost quite a lot of followers at the recently after transitioning from Twitter to X. So there's those different things that you really need to consider before choosing a platform. Just going back to kind of the basics, it's really, really important to calendarize and plan. You need to be super proactive with it because as we know, and as it is for health and social care organisations, it's a super busy industry, and social media might not be your primary responsibility. So being able to take that workload off you and schedule things and have a calendar view so people are aware of what's going out when really helps. And I think as well, just on that, although you being proactive, you also need to be reactive. So for example, if something happens within the industry, you need to be aware of what is scheduled in so that you could potentially remove that before it goes out, so there's no backlash or anything like that. And there's loads of tools that you can utilise to help you with that. So like the scheduling tools, there's social listening tools, all those kind of things that you can invest in. And also you can utilise the platforms too. You can do things manually through LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, whichever platform you choose to use. So even though there are a lot of scheduling tools and things like that available, if you don't have the budget, it's still doable through the platform. It's just a little bit more manual.
Yeah. And I think if you're starting out with a new social account for a brand, then you're probably not going to invest in all these fancy scheduling tools. Let's just start using the platform and see how you go. I think sometimes it's quite easy to have all these barriers to entry, and sometimes you just need to just go for it. You're already a brand champion. You know how you want to come across. You've already got all your brand details and just go for it.
And I think just on that as well, like obviously once you are able to show the ROI and give yourself a business case to why you need to invest more in social media, because it's bringing in loads of engagement, it's bringing in your brand awareness has grown by X% or whatever, then potentially your organisation can look into as a next stage investing in these different tools to kind of help you along the way, or potentially getting in agency support or something like that, or I don't know, AI tools to help you write content. And
I think that's really interesting from what you said anyway, and supposedly leads us on to the importance of like key performance indicators and, you know, the power of analytics and, you know, what do you do with all this information and how you tailor that content. So do you want to just kind of touch a bit about like that?
Yeah, sure. So I think it comes back to what we always say at Radar Healthcare about data. What's the point in collecting all this data if you're not going to do anything with it? So like we've touched on, social media platforms individually can give you heaps and heaps of data and information to how your posts are performing, the success of your campaigns, that kind of thing. So I think it's really important to set KPIs so that you can track and measure the success of all these different things that you're doing. You're putting in a lot of effort and work, so you want to be able to, I guess, prove that ROI and see what's working and be able to adapt content that you're posting based on what's performing well and what's not. You might find, I think as a whole, people find that people posts and short videos do really, really well. But for example, you might find that a form of that particularly works really well for your audience and another form doesn't. So I think it is a little bit of trying out things, looking at the trends that are happening and then seeing what works for you. So for example, like we've touched on, LinkedIn, for example, provides you with a whole heap of information. Their analytics are really, really good in my opinion. All the other social platforms also provide you with analytics, but they're just not as in-depth as LinkedIn is. So for example, on all the social platforms, you can see which posts perform better throughout the week. So for example, your organisation might work really well posting on a Monday, which works a lot better than posting on a Friday. And I think as well, there's other factors that you need to be aware of. So for example, you might decide that you're going to post every Monday, but then during summertime, your analytics go down slightly, but there's other factors affecting that potentially, like summer holidays, people are off, maybe people aren't on social media as much because they're outside enjoying the sunshine. There's a lot of things you need to be aware of. So I think that can pull into your analytics too.
I think just saying on that as well, sometimes it's like having an objective look at the content you're putting out. You might decide to do something like a transformation Tuesday or a throwback Thursday every week or a Friday positive like we kind of tend to do. But you have to keep reviewing that and checking, is this content what the audience wants to see? Does it peak and then die off? Do you need to adjust it? Do you need to change the content slightly? Do you need to change the hashtags? Do you need to look at something that's more trending and then adjust your content proportionately? Because there's no point in just keep doing the same thing because it worked 3 months ago.
Yeah, it might not work now. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's such a good point because, for example, like you've just said, you could do a Friday positive post one week and it'd be really, really good for a few weeks. But then in a couple of months' time, people are a little bit fed up because you're writing it the same way each time. So it's about mixing up that content. And if you are wanting to kind of do a little bit of a campaign like that, then maybe you keep the hashtag, but each time, sometimes it's a video, sometimes you're sharing a post, sometimes you're posting something, I don't know, like a top tip or something like that, and the content that you're posting with it is something a little bit different. So when you're looking at your KPIs, you need to consider what you're trying to achieve. So for example, if you're using social media to grow brand awareness, then there's specific analytics that you want to look at, specific metrics. So for example, you'll want to look at reach, you'll want to look at impressions, you might want to look at engagement. But I think these two in particular, or following, for example, are really important to track and stay on top of. So at Radar Healthcare, we have very specific targets that we want to look at every week, every month. So we kind of tailor our content and strategy around those KPIs. And I think that's really important for people to think about and do. But by periodically analysing your efforts, you're able to adjust your strategy and be reactive as well as proactive.
Yeah. There's always something in the news. There's always like reputable organisations within health and social care that share like the latest news, and it's maybe tapping into some of that industry knowledge and using it from a source that's trusted within the sector to share on your platform, and that's usually a good place to start.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's how you grow your following and you make connections too. If you decide that you really like an organisation's the way they post and you say that you're going to share their stuff, they might start sharing their stuff. So there is that community feel on social media, I do think. And I think we do tend to find that a lot on LinkedIn. I think obviously it is a B2B platform typically. So yeah.
I think it's really interesting what you said there, and especially how you can then tailor that to each of the channels and extend it as well, even to the wider marketing activity. So I suppose our audience might be quite interested in knowing like a bit about the strategy behind Radar Healthcare's social media accounts. What kind of have we done? What kind of have you done to improve brand awareness and improve engagement?
Okay, so I guess all of the things that we've spoken about, but most importantly, by strategically investing in social media and really curating content that has come off the back of feedback, looking at market research, thinking about what our partners want to see, what our audience wants to see, what's in the industry, we're able to curate almost like a calendar of content that we schedule and maintain and stay on top of, that not only resonates with our audience but also helps us grow our brand and our following. So a really good example of this would be, we recently launched our new newsletter on LinkedIn called RH Insights. If you want to go give it a follow or subscribe, please do. And basically we launched that 3 weeks ago, and within 24 hours of posting that out, it had over 500 subscribers, which is super, a massive achievement for our team, because it not only shows that like all of our efforts on social media are being rewarded, and that we've really laid the groundwork to create a community that sees us as thought leaders, which is obviously really flattering, and a bit of a pinch me moment. And yeah, the newsletter now has thousands of subscribers, so yeah, no pressure, but it's really exciting. It's something that we've never done before, but like we've just said about the content, we want to make sure that it's super fresh every single month and not salesy in any way. One thing at Radar Healthcare that we're really passionate about is sharing information, being a thought leader, someone that people can come to, not just about risk, quality and compliance, but everything about the industry. We want to be that helping hand and just trying to make our partners' lives as easy as possible. So one topic that's really pivotal in the minute is CQC and feedback, and that's what the latest newsletter is all about. It's nothing really to do with Radar Healthcare. It's more about offering best practices and how people can tackle the challenges that they might be facing at the minute. So
the RH Insights newsletter goes to all of our followers that have subscribed, essentially. How would you say that we've tackled creating like a wide range of topics to keep people engaged throughout the time that they're subscribed to our newsletters?
So we've only had 2, but the first one was all about our time at the care show and digital healthcare show. So essentially we did a bit of a recap, but a bit more of an in-depth one. We did do like a bit of a mini recap on social media, but one thing that we thought that we would do is kind of expand that out and actually list the key takeaways from each session. Obviously not everyone was able to attend the show, so that one did really, really well, because it not only targeted care organisations, but it also had a lot of healthcare insights in there too. So it really catered to a wide range of audiences. So that one for example. Then the next one that we have done is all around CQC, like I've just said. So yeah, it is more of a informational piece. So what we aim to do with every single newsletter moving forward is we want to really create things that are topical, that are relevant, that are in the industry at the moment. So for example, like the CQC feedback piece one. So potentially we could look at a little bit like the podcast. So we're looking at things that are in the industry, things that are really topical at the moment, and driving that to give people another resource straight into their inbox, or I guess feed on LinkedIn in this case, to make their lives a little bit easier. Obviously, as we've said in many podcasts before, it's hard sometimes to keep up with the trending topics. There's so much going on all the time. So if we can create a bit of a platform that makes that a little bit easier for people to receive information and stay up to date with things, then I think that's a huge win for us.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And I think also as well, it's giving our audience the option as to how they want to digest information. Nobody's the same. Everyone has different preferences. I am a huge fan of emails. I love receiving a marketing email. You're more social media. So even within a marketing team, there's distinct differences on people's behaviour. So it's making sure that you kind of capture as many people as you can do.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's such a good point. You have to be, and that like I was saying right at the start, you have to be accessible in all the touch points. So wherever your audiences are, whether they're on email, they're on Google, they're on social media, you need to be there. So yeah.
And that's also why the content needs to mirror across all channels, because you can't do one really well and forget about something else. If your website's not saying the same information or relaying the same kind of theme and messaging as your social media, there'll be a disconnect for your audience.
And they're all interconnected anyway. So for example, if you post something on social media, the URL link that you're using typically goes back to your website, and then your website might have an option to subscribe to your newsletter. And then, so it all ties in together and each one helps each other.
So social media is forever changing. Mm-hmm. It's boomed in the last few years. There's multiple channels. There's multiple new channels coming about. How do brands and individuals stay up to date with the latest trends and also keep adapting? What would be your best tips?
So like you've just said, social media is super dynamic. And I think the key to it is just being super active, having someone on social media once a week at the minimum, checking, scrolling, and just having that thought in mind that you are always learning. No one is a social media expert. It's changing that quickly that it's hard to be an expert of it. So jumping on trends, giving things a go, and you never know, that might drive engagement. So yeah, I think that is super key, to just be aware that this is an ever-growing thing and you need to grow with it, essentially. And having an active presence on social media is super key. I think as well, this comes back to understanding where your audience is. So for example, like we mentioned before, a great example is X experienced quite a lot of people not using the platform anymore after it moved from being Twitter. So if that was the main platform that you were using, you need to be aware that potentially your audience might not be on there anymore. Obviously, TikTok is a fairly new social media platform, but it's super, super popular. So for example, has your audience potentially moved from one platform to another? So those are things that you need to consider. And then another thing that I think is super important too is, obviously, we are a tech company, so we are huge on using tech to help support you in your everyday roles. So this is the same for social media. So for example, are there any tools that you could utilize that can make your job a little bit easier? If you're a one-man band, then it's going to be very, very difficult to do a lot of these things manually. So what about social scheduling tools, like we've mentioned, social listening tools that can kind of help you plan, coordinate, obviously schedule and analyse the content that you are putting out onto those platforms?
Yeah, exactly that. It's really insightful. And I suppose it kind of follows on then, what would be kind of your three things, if you could say to anyone what you should be doing, or these are the three things that really, let's do them now. What would they be?
The three musts. Yeah. Okay. It's three. So definitely have a strategy in place. That is super key, because then I think that kind of links to a lot of the other stuff that we've talked about. So obviously setting yourself KPIs, understanding why you're doing this. So that would definitely be one. Two, would be just be yourself, be authentic, make sure you're showing your personality of your brand. Like we mentioned right at the start, this can be almost like the shop window to your organisation. So it's really key to be able to show your personality and let that shine through and just become a really likeable brand that people then want to use your service. Because as we know that if you really are invested in a brand, you're more likely to go back to them and potentially look at using their service when you need to at a later date. And then, like we've just mentioned, I think technology is key to kind of help and support you through all of these things, because it's not an easy job and it can be difficult. Obviously, it is dynamic. It takes a lot of time to keep on top of it. But I think if you have the right support in place, not only just from a technical perspective, but if your team is really invested in this too, then that's really key.
Yeah. I think that there's some great 3 takeaways. There's also 3 really achievable things that you can do. I really like the way that you said, like, it's the shop window to your brand. And I think that's also can really link to, you can share so many positive stories and that will be the shop window of your brand. And I think that is also something that'd be really important within health and social care to be able to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of health and social care organisations are already doing that. They're seeing the benefit in posting all the positives. So one thing that we've started at Radar Healthcare, and I think you touched on this earlier, is the weekly Friday positive. And do you know what? 9 times out of 10, we have a whole heap of things that we could potentially post for that on a Friday, because a lot of our partners are sharing really positive stories, and it's so nice to see. It makes our job a lot nicer anyway, doesn't it? Just when you're scrolling through and you see that they're having a birthday party for someone's 100th birthday, or they've taken their residents out for the day, and do you know, just things like that, or they've won an award for being super innovative in something. So yeah, it is great to see.
And I think it also helps, like, with changing the narrative around the industry as a whole, starting to spread more of this positivity does have a massive impact on, you know, the whole sector, which is also really important.
And in social media in general, because I do think there is a bit of a stigma that you are open to a lot of negative and like backlash and things. So yeah, I think the more positive that we can spread. Obviously, we know that there are things that there's improvements that can be made and there are challenges, but I think it is nice to be able to see the positives sometimes, because like we've said, in the media it can be quite negative.
So at the end of every podcast, Becca, you know, we ask everyone, all our guests, what the HealthTech moment is. So over to you. What is your what the HealthTech moment?
So this was a really hard question, because after working at Radar Healthcare, there's so many moments that could be my what the HealthTech moment. But I think something that's kind of happened recently and that is a really standout for me is just attending the industry events that we go to on a regular basis, and just witnessing how different, even after 2.5 years, how different the industry is from back then to how it is now, and how much things are just growing at such a rapid pace in the right direction as well. So for example, we attended, like I've mentioned, the Care Show London and Digital Healthcare Show recently, and one topic that they spoke about quite heavily was how tech is obviously helping organisations, especially how organisations are looking more into interoperable tech. And I think that is just such a key thing at the minute, because if people can get I think one thing that's happened is with digital transformation, a lot of people have invested in tech because they feel like they have to, but then they've picked potentially systems that are maybe work in silo, and that they've found that they've almost just put a plaster over their issues. So I think by understanding that there are solutions out there that are interoperable, that kind of help feed into one another, which makes it so much easier for organisations looking at potentially their risk, compliance and quality processes, but then also how does that link up to my care planning software. And yeah, I think that is such a big change within such a short period of time that I've been able to witness, which is really, really interesting. But then on a more personal note, one standout memory that I really have from experiencing care firsthand is from the Prince of Wales Hospice, sorry. So a couple of years ago, my dad was admitted to the Prince of Wales Hospice on end-of-life care, and they not only looked after my dad really well, but they really, really looked after me, my mum and my brother. And I think that's the first time that I've really experienced that kind of level of care. One service that the Prince of Wales Hospice offered at the time was they had a lot of volunteers, and there was a lady called Ros who was a retired Marie Curie nurse, and out of her own personal time, she spoke to all of the family, me, my mum and my brother, together and individually for so long. For me personally, she spoke to me for over a year. It was more frequent at first, and then it kind of phased out a little bit, but I still have her number and I can contact her whenever I want, and I think that just really goes to show the kind of people that go into this industry and how passionate and committed they are. Obviously, Ros was doing that in her spare time. She didn't have to do it. She wasn't getting paid. So I think that for me was a real what the HealthTech moment. And then off the back of that, obviously in honour of my dad, but also in honour of the support that we received from the Prince of Wales Hospice and from Ros in particular, my brother and I did a skydive, and we raised over £2,000 for the Prince of Wales Hospice. So yeah, I think that would be my big what the HealthTech moment.
Wow, that's, yeah, takes your breath away, but thank you for sharing that, Becca. Like, it really is just resonates with probably so many of our audience. A lot of people will have been through, not what you've been through, but similar.
Yeah.
And to have that support network has had such a lasting impact on you and the rest of your
and
family.
it's something that we'll never forget. Prince of Wales Hospice will always have a bit of a special place in my heart now, just from the level of care that they not only offered to my dad, but especially to my mum in that time, which is just, yeah, amazing. It's definitely something you need, obviously, in those moments. So,
well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sitting in the hot seat, and thank you for sharing everything about social media and your what the HealthTech moment.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Becca. Thank you for joining us at home listening. Join us next time for another fantastic episode. Don't forget to rate and subscribe. And if you do have any questions for us, then drop them on the email whatthehealthtech@radarhealthcare.com. Thank you.